morning. This is Collaborative Check-ins, and I'm here with Gina Yoo today, Occupational Therapist with Monarch Kids Therapy. Welcome, Gina, to our conversation this morning. I am so excited because Gina is someone that's worked with my family and really supported my own daughter and myself through understanding the body and how occupational therapy can be so helpful for integrating into school and dealing with big emotions and understanding the body. So Gina, will you tell us about Monarch Kids Therapy?
Sure. We are a private occupational therapy and speech therapy pediatric clinic in Carlsbad, California. It was founded by myself and a close colleague of mine. And one of the reasons why we really felt that we wanted to open this clinic is just collaborating with other professionals, OTs included, in the local area. Really wanted to integrate the families and the children, and really looking at the whole picture of the child and family.
It's so wonderful to hear about that integration of these different approaches and really supporting the whole child. And you know, that's so important to my work as well. What has been working for this time during COVID for telehealth? How has that been looking?
It's so interesting you asked that, because we opened at the end of January, and so we're a new clinic. And it's been a big transition because a lot of the families that we were seeing at the previous clinic really wanted to come and follow us and really sustain and continue the care that we were providing. And 2 months in,
everything changed.
COVID hit, and so it was a huge transition for everybody, not just for us and our staff, but also for the families and the children, because they were just adjusting to this new environment. But what's really been working is the specialness about this is that we have a real live glimpse into the family's life and the child's life and the dynamics that happen, and kind of really having a better understanding of how the child fits into the family unit and the relationship between the family and the child and siblings too. That's been really cool to kind of see how that's evolved and developed through the telehealth.
Yeah, because you're seeing the child in their home environment with the parents. And is it looking like coaching where you're supporting the parent and child in their exploration at home?
Yes, there's a lot of coaching, and thankfully something that was, it was kind of unexpected for me. I mean, we have some fantastic parents and families, and they've always been, 100% invested in the child's care. And we kind of set up the precedent of you're expected to be involved in the sessions, even in the clinic, because it's so important, because what we do on a one-on-one basis outside of the home environment is such a small, tiny part in what happens in the entire, in the child's entire, life and world. And so we really want to ensure that there is that consistency.
When I'm working with families and I look at the body, I instantly think about how occupational therapy brings in that foundation to supporting the child's nervous system. Mm-hmm. And I know that during this time, during these heightened stress experiences, what's something you look at or recommend for children during this time?
This is a really stressful time, I think, for everybody, just given the changes, and there's unpredictability involved in that, because we don't know even just next year for school, that's still all up in the air right now for everyone. And, it's not only stressful for the parents, but it's really stressful for the children as well, as much as that. And I think it's even harder on them because they're not really fully comprehending maybe what's happening, and that unpredictability just is really, it can cause uneasiness and uncomfortableness. And so what we're seeing is almost kind of like a heightened stress response in some ways with some of our kids, because their routines are thrown off, right? I mean, they're not going to school anymore. Mom or dad are now the teachers, and they're kind of seeing even class time is on the computer now. So everything is just so different. So we've really been targeting the nervous system in a way where we have been trying to develop specific home program ideas that really target vagal nerve activation to really support that regulatory piece and to really kind of calm down the sympathetic system and let's turn on the parasympathetic system. And there has been some really positive feedback in that way. And, you know, we work really closely with the parents to really help them figure out, okay, like what part of the day is going to work best, and really understanding and being observant of maybe patterns of behavior that they might be seeing. You know, a lot of families have given us feedback saying the end of the day is really tough. You know, the morning is great, but as the day goes on, it's just.
Yeah, what do you hear? I know I have my examples, but what are you hearing that the children might look like when that nervous system is high arousal? What does that look like?
Sure. So some kids are just more easily triggered than they typically.
Yeah, so like big upsets,
Yes.
maybe over little things that might seem simple, but to them it's bigger.
Yes, definitely that. Sometimes sleep is disrupted as well. We had a few kiddos who were just waking up in the middle of the night, and some of them have the language to express and some of them don't, you know, so the parent is really trying to figure out, you know, what's going on. And one specific child that I'm thinking about, the mom she's fantastic, and she was asking just the right questions, and the child said, school, I miss school. Right. And so like that was really telling, you know, she's feeling stressed out about this transition. Right. You know, and otherwise she's a great sleeper, you know, so there's sleep disruption. Sometimes there's disruption with bowel and bladder, so kids who are kind of, you know, before the transition, they were kind of in that stage of starting to get potty trained. And now it's kind of, that's been put on pause because it's just been too much emotionally and on their nervous system to really handle all of that. So that's kind of been on pause for some families. And other kids are just on the opposite end of the spectrum, like a little bit harder to engage. You know, they're kind of becoming a little bit more introverted. It's like, I just can't even engage with my world and the people in my environment right now because it's just too much right now for me.
Right. So what are some examples that you all do for supporting the vagal nerve and that connection?
Some things that we do also, because a lot of our clientele are between the ages of 3 and 5. So it's so they're not necessarily, and I feel like even some of the older kids that we have too, like it's kind of boring. Okay, now we're going to take these deep breaths, or you know, things like that. So we really want to try to make it very play-based and very fun. At the same time, because, you know, we kind of know about sensory processing and kind of know that a lot of these kids too also have challenges with processing multisensory information, and all of their sensory systems are not yet well integrated, which kind of is also a contributing factor to some of this heightened arousal and kind of like this, you know, heightened sympathetic response. So we've done a lot of blowing bubbles in lots of different ways. Blowing activities. We've done blowing cotton balls through a straw, you know, we've done blowing bubble, you know, getting a big bowl of bubbles, and the child is involved in the whole process of kind of making it. Yes, so they'll help with the water, they'll help put the soap in. We've also done a lot of inversion activities as well. So we want to try to add a little bit of a vestibular component to that too. And so just using everyday things in the house, like a couch, you know, so a lot of our kids will want to do little obstacle courses on their couch. Right. And sometimes they go on their stomachs and they're way inverted to get a puzzle piece, let's say, or they're upside down on their backs and they're reaching up to go get a puzzle piece or a toy. So those are probably, you know, some of the biggest ones that we, you know, the most common ones that we've done. I know cold therapy is also something. We haven't quite fully explored that yet, but I think that is something that we do want to start to incorporate more in just kind of playing in ice water, you know, or doing like a little hide and seek. Water beads are great, and just sticking them in the, you know, sticking it in the fridge before you get to play with them, you know, things like that, where that can also help that vagal nerve stimulation.
Yeah, so you're getting the body into this experience of breathing and connecting to that gut and that strength in the core, and also having this aroused response, like to the coldness or to the body movement, while also remaining calm. So you're really supporting the body to get that feeling, to understand that feeling.
Yes.
Versus being reactive to the feeling.
Yes. And obviously it's graded based on each child's ability to take in and process that information. Some children, upside down isn't going to work for them, because it's just way too much vestibular input, for them. So then we'll think of other things that they could possibly do.
When a parent sees a child playing, they might not realize how intricate and how necessary those movements are. And I'm hearing a lot of parents talking about their children feeling depressed or high anxiety and these big kind of therapy words or diagnostic words. And knowing that there are ways we can incorporate movement and these occupational therapy techniques, that there's options for helping them is so useful.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And I think adding the play part of it, the fun part, it is so important and critical to all of that, because laughter also is, it's so powerful, right? And it kind of provides that exhale in a way. So we have kids that are holding these tension patterns, right? Because they are in such high arousal. And then you give them an activity that, that physiologically we're changing how their body's responding, but also too, it's a fun activity and they're really enjoying themselves and the parent is having fun. And that just kind of helps that release. And that's been really cool also to see is how relationships have changed and evolved through the telehealth, because the parents are really, they've always been so involved, but now that we're in their homes, it really, there's a huge parent education piece to our therapy as well. Sometimes that means scheduling a separate parent meeting outside in private where the child may be out of the house or the child might be napping, or we can do it at the end of the session. We just really ensure that it needs to be done in a private place, so the child is not sitting and listening.
Yeah, some of the evening sessions are helpful.
Yeah, right.
And again, just knowing that there are resources, and that's, the main point of me even having these collaborative check-ins, to let families know that while we're talking about mental health and we're talking about these big words like anxiety, that there are resources. Can you tell me, I've talked to you about primitive reflexes and looking at the body in terms of how an individual, a child, can hold a reflex in their bodies that may not need to be there anymore.
Sure.
How can we explain that more to parents? Because I see it being so beneficial in terms of exercises the child can do and developing that mind-body connection for them to be able to cope with big stressors in life.
Most definitely. Yeah. And that's a really good point and a really good question. The first reflex that really comes to mind is the MORO reflex, because that's our startle reflex. And that's our, most primitive defense mechanism for our bodies. And that's something that doesn't necessarily go away. It just matures as you get older, because we need that for our survival, right? And so with the MORO, it's kind of like going back a little bit with the inhale, exhale that we were talking about with the release. So with the MORO, there's this big giant inhale. So when there is a stimulus, whether it's something you hear or there's a quick change in body position or head position, you kind of tense up and then you relax.
Okay.
And that's the MORO reflex. And so we want to see both of those phases happen, because it's like you tense up because you're like, okay, now what do I need to do? The sympathetic response is kicked on and it's like, okay, am I going to run? Am I going to lay down and freeze? Right? Am I going to fight? And so that kind of preps that system, but then you realize, oh, okay, it was just a garbage truck. Right. And then you're like, oh, okay, I can relax. I'm not in danger. And so many of our kids, sometimes that reflex is not necessarily fully matured. And so what happens is, and it's so closely related to breath as well. And when we think about the diaphragm, and we really think about rib cage mobility and how that's all interrelated, because that's what you're doing with the MORO, you're breathing in. And so what's happening, your diaphragm, compresses down, the lungs fill up with air, right? There's rib cage mobility to kind of expand, right? To take on that capacity of the air. And then when you exhale, the lungs collapse, the diaphragm comes back up again, right? And so many of our children, they may have not necessarily gone through the maturation of the MORO to be reactive in those really life-threatening situations. And so little things like somebody just walks by you, right? From behind, let's say. That in itself, Right, right. And so many of our kids go into that tension response, right? The inhale, but they're not always exhaling. And so they're holding this tension pattern. And so what happens is eventually over time, because they haven't learned to exhale, over time, this is how they learn to move their body. This is how they learn about their body. And when we think about movement through space, which also is another key element in really understanding not only our bodies and ourselves, but how the relationship between that and our environment. Because that, this is our reference point right here, right? Yeah. This is what tells us and helps us perceive and understand what's happening around us, Right. And so another reflex that I'm also thinking about is the tonic labyrinthine reflex, which is involved in flexion. So with head movement, when your head goes down, you're flexing, it activates all these muscles, and it also is involved in extension. And those are the key muscles that are related to our core. And so when we think about children, infants, when they first learn, I mean, how many times have you heard, my baby does not like tummy time?
Right, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Exactly, yeah. And so that reflex is in place to help the child pick their head up against gravity. And so gravity, it's something we're always working against. And it also gives a lot of information about where our body is in space. And then that also helps develop that reference point. And depending on how much you've moved against gravity as you've gone through infancy and really going into those developmental milestones. And the first thing is picking up your head against gravity when you're on your stomach, right? Or starting to roll, you're working against gravity in that way. And a lot of our children, again, they may not have necessarily gone through those kinds of anti-gravity movements in a way that fully, let's say. And so their perception, their reference point now has become skewed. Now they're, 5, 6, 7 years old, and you're seeing, and how that translates is, you're seeing children maybe who are a little bit more highly triggered emotionally to stimulus, right? These are the kids that also can be extremely overwhelmed in busier environments. So birthday parties are a no-go, going to the zoo, you have to be really, mindful about how you have your child participate in these types of activities, because their nervous system is already just so heightened, and we can kind of trace that back to some of those primitive reflexes that haven't necessarily fully matured or integrated, and looking at how do they move against gravity. I mean, right now, I have older children who are 11, 13 years old who still are working on pushing up. Yes. In that tummy time position, and you wouldn't expect that from these kids, because they appear very typically developing, and they look like they're moving fluidly through space. But when you start to really pick away and challenge them, and these are kids maybe who aren't inclined to play sports, right? You know what I mean? Who don't want to do a gymnastics class, and also these are the kids who can have some challenges in social skills as well, making friends and keeping those relationships, because their reference point is kind of skewed.
Yeah. Right. I'm imagining that if your body physiologically is telling you that you don't know where you are in space, meaning like you don't know where your body boundaries are, and you're fighting against this gravity that's always there, that's pretty stressful. And then as you work to integrate it, it feels like you get more ease and fluidity, and life's not as challenging. And you're totally right that you can't necessarily see it. You're like, oh, my kid can run and they can catch a ball, or, they seem okay. And so, yes, they are. And we can develop these internal organizations, and they can thrive even more. Yeah. So when we're talking about primitive reflexes, there are exercises then, or activities that they can do, some of which you've already kind of talked about, being upside down, using the core. Any other ones that we could think about for parents to explore with their kids?
Yeah, sure. Definitely something that I've really recommended is, well, now that the playgrounds are open, but like using the swings at the playground in different ways is something that is not only really fun for everybody, but it does help with some of the extensor flexion patterns. So sometimes what we'll tell the families is, yeah, let's try, have Timmy lay on the swing on his tummy, And what you can do is he can either propel it by himself with his feet, or you can hold his hands and he can kind of help push. And that movement, that vestibular piece with the swinging, activates those postural muscles. So in this case, the extensor muscles. And so it really kind of just helps activate that. And it's like, oh, okay. And it just gives, it almost kind of changes a little bit of the brain's perspective, because these are muscles that maybe have not necessarily been activated in that way. And then you add a visual component. Oh, give mommy high five here, right, as they're swinging. So now we're incorporating the visual system as well, and really just kind of help, again, integration and the organizational piece. There's rhythmicity to the swinging at the same time. And so that really helps build some of that internal fluidity and rhythm as well. So that's been a really fantastic activity for a lot of families. I use the yoga ball a lot as well. I feel like a lot of families have a yoga ball at home, just for themselves.
to roll forward and back on?
Yep. So we've done rolling. We've even done just like kind of getting into a wheelbarrow walk where the parent will just kind of spot the child, so that to make sure that they don't roll off of the ball, and then they'll kind of roll and walk on their hands all the way down to their ankles to maybe get something or not, and then they just walk back, and then they go back on, does that make sense?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
we'll do a lot of those activities as well. I also incorporate a lot of like log rolling activities, and it doesn't matter what age, honestly, because that is a fantastic activity that really works on flexion and extension patterns, and also with head and neck righting, which is so critical. So many of our kids, again, when we think about anti-gravity, they just kind of fall into, they're just kind of falling into gravity here or here, and so that's been really fun too, to kind of just incorporate different types of log rolling games. And sometimes it can be repetitive where they're doing 5 or 6 rolls. And sometimes it's just a half roll. So they're just going into side lie, and then they're going back on their back, and then they go into side lie the other position. So it really, and then you add, a fun component to that. And sometimes, because a lot of our children are much younger, sometimes it's just enough to do that. And then mommy or daddy gives them tickles, or they get high fives, or you know what I mean? A byproduct of all this is, again, we're building that relationship and that bond. And that's also been really special to see how that's, again, like evolved and grown through this telehealth experience.
Yes, yeah. And so when you're talking about the roll, then the head is having to kind of go in the opposite direction of gravity versus falling.
Yes, yeah, versus falling. Yes.
Yeah, I was picturing that. It's so wonderful to know that as we're playing with our kids, we are actually strengthening this nervous system and this body at the same time.
Totally. Yeah. Life is stressful already, right, to begin with, and now you have children or multiple children, and that just adds to that. And a lot of our families either are it's a two parent working household, so there's not sometimes juggling all of like the work schedules and also the kids at the same time. A lot of our families are in the military. One parent is in the military, and and one parent can be deployed. And so now we have basically a single parent household, right? Trying to manage like 2 to 3 kids at a time. And so, I think the biggest thing in as far as parent education goes is, really understanding kind of like the neuroscience behind it, but also at the same time, not really being bogged down with all of that terminology, but really how does that translate functionally, and really understanding and knowing what's meaningful for the parent, and this is where the therapist, parent relationship really comes in. And really truly, as a therapist, like I want to get as much information as I can from the parent to really be able to individualize and for me to better understand their perspective and kind of understand like what are the joys and strengths that they see every day, but also what are the challenges that they see, and how can we kind of work together to really individualize a plan or activities that they can do to support not only the child, but the whole family dynamic and the family unit as a whole.
Right. Yeah. Because this education piece and understanding how the body works really helps the child in their emotional regulation. And
yes.
When we come from a top-down perspective of just saying, oh, they're having these thoughts and these emotions, it's incomplete. And so your piece is really adding in the bottom up and understanding that the body can really support these moods and these experiences. But I've also been finding like using a sensory diet with kids, but less of like an OT sensory diet, like for that hour, but really thinking about the flow of the day and how to incorporate like different activities to organize the child throughout the day so that it's not just like visual, 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 and then having that balance. Or like a kid who wakes up with lots of noise and then is like immediately upset. Like maybe we start off the day with something visual and then we get into the noise, you know, like just seeing how that child's fluidity is.
Right, right. And we, I mean, I don't know, we don't necessarily call them like a sensory diet because I feel like that the way that that's been kind of constructed, there's like so much rigidity, I feel like, to it, you know, even like moment to moment for our kids, you know, can be so different and it's just so dynamic that, you know, what's been really key is teaching the parents the child's body signals, and they already know their child so well, but it's really adding meaning to that. Like, what does that mean? Like, what is the thing that their behavior, like, what is that, what's the underlying message that they're trying to, like, you know, tell us through what they're doing and how they're acting. And when parents have a better understanding of that piece, then the activities are so much easier to kind of plug in where they need to, you know. Not only that, but even just understanding too, like really being, again, like we talked about earlier, being observant of patterns of behavior, you know. It could be after breakfast, they end up watching a video or playing a video game, let's say, for like an hour or so. And then right after that, the parent is noticing, oh my gosh, you know, he's generally a bit more, you know, higher anxiety, or they're just more reactive to things and not as resilient as he typically is. And so then we can problem solve and say, okay, well, what else can we do in place of, because maybe it's, you know, all that screen time may not be beneficial, you know, and it's actually kind of counterproductive. So we either decrease it, maybe we add a blue light filter to it, maybe we just kind of get rid of that altogether and find a different time for that. That's going to work a little bit better for that child. And then we just substitute that with maybe another sensory activity. Let's say that's going to be really helpful in just targeting all those things. Right. So I think that's really been the key thing, is really just helping parents understand their child's behaviors, their child's body language, and adding meaning to that. And then doing the activities, it just seems to make more sense in that way, right, you know, versus just giving them, okay, here are the activities that you can do them at 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3, right?
Right. And just bringing that, my hope is like bringing awareness to that there are these different sensory experiences and body experiences that the child's having, and we can help organize it. So like, I really admire what you're saying of just that, even if it's not working over here, maybe we add it to a different time of day, or we shorten it, or we lengthen it, or we pair it with some type of physical activity, you know, or like, you know, when you're talking about the rolling, but pairing it with something that you're looking at, how we have options to expand, and that gives some more meaningfulness to what the child's doing, how they're feeling, and what they need at that time.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, how can our families find more information from you?
They can go to our website at monarchkidstherapy.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Monarch Kids Therapy.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to speaking to you some more.
Thank you, Lori. This has been wonderful. And thank you for all the work that you do, you know, working so closely with the community and just kind of helping get that information out there, you know, so that's really valuable. And I so appreciate that about you.
Thank you.